My stepmother forced my dad to kick me out of my childhood home, claiming I was a bad influence on her kids. 3 years later, when she tried to use the property to secure a loan, she learned who really owned it. I still can't wrap my head around what happened to me 3 years ago. This is going to sound crazy, but I swear this is all true. I'm David, 25 now, and I still can't believe my own father kicked me out of my childhood home with no warning, all because of my stepmother's lies. And it didn't stop there. The twist that came later? I didn't even know it at the time, but I was actually the one who owned the house all along. You won't believe how everything turned out. Let me start from the beginning. Growing up, things were good. My dad, Wyatt, was always there for me. My mom had passed when I was young, and I leaned on my dad a lot. But when I was about 15, he remarried Nora. At first, I thought it was fine. I mean, I wasn't thrilled about it, but Nora seemed nice enough. She had 2 kids, Lily and Riley, who were a couple of years younger than me. Honestly, we never really clicked, but we weren't enemies either. Tried to get along with them. We had our ups and downs, but that was just part of being a family, right? The thing is, as time went on, I started noticing little things about Nora. She wasn't the easiest to live with. She was controlling in weird ways, always making snide comments when no one was looking, especially about how I was too much of a boy or too independent. It started feeling like I was walking on eggshells around her. But I never thought it was that big of a deal, honestly. I figured it was just her being a stepmom, trying to figure out how to handle someone who wasn't her kid. I mean, I wasn't perfect either. I was a teenager with an attitude, but still, I didn't think it would ever lead to what happened next. Here's the part that still blows my mind. One day, I came home after a shift at my part-time job, and the house was different. I walked in, and it was eerily quiet. I figured my dad and Nora were just in their room or something, but then I saw it. My things, my clothes, my stuff, all packed up. I remember standing there frozen, thinking I must have misunderstood. Then my dad, Wyatt, came out of the living room. I asked what was going on, and he just told me to leave. No emotion, no explanation. He just said, "It's time for you to go." Nora was standing behind him, and she had this weird look on her face like she was waiting for me to react. I was speechless, honestly. I didn't even know what to say. It's not like I was in trouble with the law or anything. I hadn't even been skipping school. I was just trying to get through life like everyone else. But my dad, my own dad, was telling me to leave my home like it was no big deal. And Nora was just standing there watching, not saying a word. When I asked why, Wyatt said, "You've been a bad influence on Lily and Riley. You're causing too much tension around here. It's better for everyone if you just leave." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A bad influence, what does that even mean? The thing is, I had always tried to be nice to Lily and Riley, even though they weren't exactly easy to get along with. I thought maybe they didn't like me because I was their mum's husband's kid, and they resented me, but I'd never done anything to hurt them. And I didn't even get the chance to argue. My dad just told me to pack my things and go. That was it. No explanation. No attempt to explain what had changed. Just go, so that's how it happened. I was 22, kicked out of my own home and left to figure out what the hell to do. No warning, no discussion, just kicked out. I'll never forget that feeling. My whole world flipped upside down in a matter of seconds. It was humiliating. I had nowhere to go. I ended up crashing at a few friends' places for a while, barely getting by. But all I could think about was my dad. How could he do that to me? How could he just listen to Nora without even giving me the chance to explain myself? It was like he didn't even care anymore. At first, I thought it might be a misunderstanding. Maybe Nora had gotten in his ear and he didn't understand the full picture. But as time went on, I realized this wasn't some momentary lapse. This was his decision. He sided with her. He believed her when she said I was the problem. I didn't even recognize my own dad anymore. But that's not the worst part. No, the worst part is when I found out what Nora had been doing behind my back. Months later, after I was finally starting to get my feet back under me, I found out that Nora had been telling people that the house was hers. She told everyone that Wyatt had given her the house as a gift, and that they were going to sell it to secure their future. I was floored when I heard that. The house I had grown up in, the house that had been in our family for years, she was pretending it was hers to get attention, to get sympathy, to make her look like the good guy. But why? Why lie about something like that? And then I found out something that completely changed everything. The house wasn't even in my dad's name. It was in mine. I didn't even know it at the time, but when I was looking through old papers for some legal stuff, I found the deed. Turns out, my dad had signed the house over to me years ago during a financial crisis. It was supposed to be protected from creditors, but for some reason, he never told me about it. I had been the legal owner of the house all along. Can you imagine the feeling I had when I realized that? I was kicked out of my own house, forced to leave with nothing, and all along, it was mine. That house had always been mine. I still don't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to confront my dad, but another part of me wanted to just walk away and leave it all behind. I was angry, hurt, and completely betrayed. My own father hadn't told me about this, and Nora had been pretending like it was hers. I didn't know what to do with the information at first. It was too much to process. But one thing was clear. The situation wasn't as simple as I thought. I wasn't the one who'd been wrong. And when I realized that, it was the beginning of everything changing. Update. So, if you've been following my story, you know that I was kicked out of my childhood home by my dad, Wyatt, who said I was a bad influence on his new family. That's already messed up enough. But what happened next? Yeah, it's a wild ride, and it wasn't over after that first betrayal. It only got worse. I spent the first few months after getting kicked out in a haze of confusion. I was 22 and suddenly had nowhere to go. I wasn't exactly rich, so crashing at friends' places was all I could do. I mean, I wasn't totally homeless, but it felt like I had nowhere to call home. I had never really prepared for this kind of situation. One day I was living in a house that I thought was mine, and the next day I was trying to figure out where the hell I was supposed to sleep. In those early days, I just couldn't stop thinking about my dad. It wasn't like we fought or had some huge blowout. He just turned on me. I kept telling myself that maybe Nora had twisted his mind or made him see things differently. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized he chose to believe her. And I just couldn't accept that. My dad had always been my rock. Growing up, it was just the two of us after my mum passed. He was everything to me, and now I didn't even recognize him. I honestly didn't know what to feel anymore. Angry? Yes. Sad? Absolutely. But also heartbroken. That's the hardest part to admit. My dad broke my trust in the most unexpected way. So, I spent months living on friends' couches, bouncing between places, barely scraping by. I worked a couple of part-time jobs, doing whatever I could just to stay afloat. It wasn't ideal, but it was survival. There were days when I felt like I was barely hanging on. I'd go to bed wondering what the hell happened to my life. Was this really how it was going to be from now on? Living with this weight of betrayal? But here's where it gets even worse. One day, I was hanging out with a friend, just venting about my situation, when he casually mentioned that he'd overheard Nora talking to some people about the house. Apparently, she'd been telling everyone that she and my dad were planning to sell the place. She even went so far as to say that she had full ownership of it, my own house, the place I grew up in, and she was acting like it was hers. I was so shocked that I didn't know how to react at first. I mean, how could she just pretend it was hers? That was my home, my memories, the place I grew up where I spent years with my dad. The idea that she was telling people it was hers, while I was living on other people's couches, made me feel like the floor had been ripped out from under me. But wait, it gets worse. A few weeks later, I ran into an old neighbor while I was walking through the neighborhood. They mentioned something about how they'd heard Nora talking about using the house to get a loan. She was apparently going to use it as collateral for some sort of personal loan. My stomach sank when I heard that. She was using my childhood home, the place that had been a safe haven for me, to try and get money. I won't lie. At that moment, something inside me snapped. I was furious. I felt like I was suffocating in this sea of lies and manipulation. I started thinking about how my dad had just gone along with all of this, how he had let her do this to me. For the first time, I realized just how far Nora's influence had stretched. And the worst part? I realized that I wasn't even sure if my dad even cared about me anymore. The more I dug into this whole thing, the more it became clear that Nora was trying to screw me over in every way possible. She'd told everyone that the house was hers. She was going around trying to get loans based on the place, and she was doing it all behind my back. And my dad? He was letting it happen. I started looking into the legal side of things. I had no idea what was going on, but I knew that I had to find out who really owned the house. At this point, I just wanted answers. I didn't know if it was worth anything to me anymore, but I had to know. So I contacted a lawyer. I needed to figure out how to reclaim my life, how to get some control back in this mess. I remember the day I found out the truth like it was yesterday. I went through some old papers that I had stashed away, papers that I'd never really looked at before, and there it was, the deed to the house, in my name. I was the legal owner of the house, not Wyatt, not Nora. The shock hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't even breathe for a moment. The house was mine. My dad had signed it over to me years ago when he was going through some financial trouble, but he never told me about it. And now I realized that everything that had happened, the betrayal, the lies, being kicked out, all of it had been for nothing. The house was mine, and no one knew. At first, I didn't know what to do with this information. Part of me was still reeling from everything that had happened. How could my dad not tell me? Why hadn't he warned me? But the other part of me was just angry. I was pissed. I wasn't going to let this go. Not now. Not after everything Nora had done. But even with the truth in my hands, I still didn't know how to confront my dad. I felt so betrayed. And the worst part? I still loved him. I still wanted to believe that he would come around, that he'd realize how wrong he was. But deep down, I knew that things would never be the same between us. The emotional toll of all this was hard to explain. I wanted justice. I wanted closure, but at the same time, I wanted to fix things with my dad. But it seemed impossible. I wasn't sure if I could forgive him, and part of me didn't know if I even wanted to anymore. I didn't tell Nora I knew yet. I was still processing everything, figuring out my next steps, but one thing was for sure. I wasn't going to just let her walk all over me. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I had to take control. I had the power now, and I wasn't going to sit back and let them destroy everything I'd worked for. Finally, update. It's been a crazy few months since I found out that the house was actually mine. Honestly, I still couldn't believe it at first. The anger, betrayal, all of it still simmered inside me, but now I had something even bigger on my side. The truth. The house was legally mine, and my stepmother Nora had been trying to play it off as hers while using it to secure a loan. It felt like I was in some kind of messed up soap opera, except it was my real life. At this point, I wasn't just sitting around being angry anymore. I had a decision to make. Do I confront my dad? Do I try to fix things with him? Or do I use this opportunity to get justice and reclaim what was rightfully mine? I had no idea what the answer was, but I knew I couldn't just let Nora get away with everything she'd done. She'd lied to everyone, used my dad's vulnerability to manipulate him, and had almost taken everything from me. That wasn't going to fly. The first step was figuring out what I was going to do with the house. I wasn't interested in living there anymore, not after everything that had happened, but I knew that if I let Nora keep using it as leverage, she'd never stop. So I decided it was time for a confrontation. The day I walked into that house for the first time in years, I was shaking. I felt like I was walking into the lion's den, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I knew who I was now. I had control. As I opened the front door, I could hear Nora talking in the living room. It felt surreal, like time had frozen. This was my home, the place I grew up in, and it had been twisted into something else entirely. Nora was sitting on the couch talking to some guy. When I stepped inside, she froze. I could see the moment she realized what was about to happen. Her face went white and she immediately stood up, trying to act casual but failing miserably. "David," she said, her voice forced and stiff. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here for the house," I replied, my voice more steady than I felt. "I know everything. You've been using it to secure a loan, pretending it's yours, telling everyone it is. I'm the owner, not you." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't respond immediately. She was caught off guard, and I could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out how to spin this in her favor, but I wasn't going to let her. I pulled out the legal papers I had from the lawyer. "This is the deed. The house is mine. I'm done being pushed around." At this point, Nora finally spoke. "You don't know what you're talking about," she snapped, trying to keep her composure. "Wyatt and I have been talking about selling this place for months. It's part of our plan. You don't have a say anymore." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was still trying to act like this was all her decision, like she could just steamroll over me, but I wasn't backing down. "Your plan is over, Nora. I'm done letting you lie about what's mine. It's time for you to face the truth." She crossed her arms, clearly trying to hold on to whatever power she thought she had, but I wasn't the scared kid anymore. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me. The truth was in my hands, and I was going to make sure she knew it. "I don't want the house," I said. "I've had enough of this place, but I'm not going to let you sell it off and act like you're the one who built this life. I'm going to sell it, and I'll make sure the money goes to the right place. Not to you, not to Wyatt." Nora's face turned from anger to something almost pleading. "You're really going to do this? Do you think your father is going to forgive you for this, for taking everything from him?" I could feel the weight of her words. I did care about my dad, despite everything that had happened, but I wasn't going to let Nora manipulate me into feeling guilty. Not anymore. "No," I said, feeling a calmness wash over me. "I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it for me. Because I'm done with the lies, and I'm done letting you control everything." That's when the door opened and Wyatt walked in. He looked confused at first, and I could see the moment he realized what was going on. His eyes flicked to the papers in my hand, and then to Nora. I could see him start to panic. "David, what's going on?" Wyatt asked, his voice shaky. He looked at me, but there was a hesitation in his eyes. He had been a part of this too, and I couldn't ignore the hurt I still felt from him abandoning me so easily. "Nora's been lying, Dad," I said, trying to stay calm. "This house isn't hers, it's mine. You've been used, and I'm not going to let her use you anymore." Wyatt didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, looking at me then at Nora. The silence felt suffocating. I didn't know," Wyatt said finally. His voice was broken and I could hear the guilt in it. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was helping. I never wanted you to leave, David. Hearing that was like a punch to the gut. He never wanted me to leave, then why didn't he fight for me? Why didn't he see what Nora was doing?" "I'm sorry, David," Wyatt said, his voice quiet. "I should have protected you. I should have known better." It was too late for apologies. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just tired. Tired of fighting, tired of feeling like I wasn't enough for him, tired of being the one who always had to pick up the pieces. So I did what I had to do. I sold the house. It wasn't about the money for me. It wasn't even about the house. It was about closing this chapter and moving on. I sold it to a developer, and the check was huge. But I didn't keep a dime of it. I made sure the money went into a trust, one that would go to me, no one else. Not Wyatt, not Nora. I wasn't going to let them benefit from my loss. Thanks for watching this video. Please like this video